just until the road clears. That's what she said, standing in the doorway of a lodge that had been closed for 4 months, with snow up to the middle of her shins and a 12-year-old dog shivering against her leg. It was 9 at night. It was the 4th of January. The wind had been running at 40 for 6 hours, and Kestrel Pass had gone under at about 7, which I knew because I'd watched the last plow come down and not go back up. I said, "The road's not clearing tonight. Tomorrow, then." "Ma'am, I don't think you understand what's happening out there." And she looked past me into a dark lobby with sheets over the furniture, and then she looked back at me, and she said, and I want you to hear the exact tone, because it was not a request, it was a woman, running out of options in front of a stranger. "I have to be in Missoula on Friday, so tomorrow." Kestrel Pass reopened on the 10th. 6 days. My name is Cal Merrick. I'm 46. I am the winter caretaker of the Alderline Lodge, which sits at 7,000 feet on the south side of Kestrel Pass in Montana, 22 miles above a town called Hollow Fork, with a population of about 300. The lodge closes the second week of October and opens the third week of May. In between there is one person up there, and it's me, and it has been me for 11 winters. I took the job for one. That's the whole thing you need to know about me, and it took a woman with a dog 6 days to say it out loud to my face. Her name was Tess Aldridge. She was 34. The dog was Boone, and he was mostly deaf, and he took to me immediately, which she said was unusual, and which I chose to take as a compliment. Here's what I got out of her the first night, which wasn't much. She was a veterinarian. She'd been working relief and emergency shifts in Spokane for 9 years. She was driving to Missoula because there was a practice there, a 2-doctor small animal practice on Reserve Street, and a woman named Dr. Halverson was retiring, and Tess had until Friday the 9th to sign and wire the down payment. 9 years of relief shifts, $180,000 saved, and a seller who had, in Tess's words, a perfectly nice backup buyer who has been circling this thing like a gull. She had no phone signal, because nobody has phone signal at Alderline. There is a landline in the office, and it works about 60% of the time. She got through to Dr. Halverson's office on the second day. She was on that phone for 4 minutes, and I heard her say, "I understand," 3 times, and then she came into the kitchen and sat down and didn't say anything for a while. I said, "Friday still Friday?" And she said, "Friday's still Friday." I want to tell you about the first 3 days, because everybody wants the dramatic version, and the dramatic version isn't what actually happened. What actually happened is that 2 adults who had no interest in each other's company did chores. The lodge runs on propane and a diesel generator, and in January I run it 4 hours a day, morning and evening. The rest of the time it's a wood stove in the kitchen and one in the manager's cabin, and that's it. I put her in room 12 on the 2nd floor because it shares a chimney wall with the kitchen, and it's the only room up there that stays above 50. Day 1 she was furious and polite, which is a specific combination. Day 2, the intake line on the east wing froze, and I spent 5 hours with a heat gun, and she held a flashlight for 4 of them, without being asked and without complaining once. When we got it thawed, she said, "Is that a thing that happens often?" And I said, "Every winter." And she said, "And you just do that every winter by yourself." I remember thinking she'd said something ordinary. She hadn't. Day 3 we shoveled the generator shed out twice, because it drifted twice. And in between there were the small things, and the small things are what actually happened. She cooked on the 3rd night. There is not a great deal in the Alderline pantry in January. Flour, rice, canned tomatoes, about 40 pounds of onions for reasons I've never understood, and she made something out of it that was better than anything I'd made for myself in 4 months. She did it without commenting on the fact that she was doing it, which I noticed. Boone worked out on the 2nd day that the warmest square foot in that entire building was directly in front of the kitchen stove, and after that he did not move from it except to go outside, and he went outside reluctantly, and he made his feelings on the matter known. She asked me on the 2nd night whether there was internet. I said there was a satellite unit that worked when the sky was clear, and the sky had not been clear since November. And she said, "So there's genuinely nothing to do." And I said, "There's genuinely nothing to do." She sat with that for a second, and then she said, "Huh," and that was the first sound she made up there that wasn't about the road. And somewhere in the middle of the 3rd afternoon, sitting on an upturned crate in a generator shed at 7,000 feet, she said, Why is a man your age alone on a mountain? I said, because it's a job. And she said, that's not an answer. That's a sentence you've used before. Which was true, and which is the moment I actually started paying attention to her. If you're still here, and I know this is where people decide whether they want the rest of it, do me one favor and hit subscribe. Because on the 4th day something came up that road that gave her a way out, and what she did about it is the reason I'm telling you any of this at all. Now, day 4. At about 11 in the morning on the 7th of January, I heard a plow. You learn to hear them. It's a specific sound, and it carries a long way in cold air, and it means a great deal to a man who lives at the end of 22 miles of switchbacks. It was a MDT crew running the lower section, and they'd got as far as the Alderline turnout, and they stopped, because the lodge is a checkpoint and they always stop. 2 guys. One of them I've known 9 years, a man named Curtis with a mustache and no small talk. And Curtis said what I knew he was going to say, which was, "You got a car in the lot. Somebody stuck up here?" I said yes. And he said, "We can walk her down. We're running back to Hollow Fork at noon. She can leave the car, get a room at the Sundowner, be in Missoula tomorrow night." That is a real offer. I want to be clear about that, because I've had people tell me since that I made it up or exaggerated it. It was a genuine, straightforward, no-cost way out, offered by a state plow crew at 11 in the morning on the 4th day, 2 days before her deadline. I went inside and I told her. She was at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, and Boone asleep on her feet, and I said, "Curtis will walk you down at noon. You'd be in Missoula tomorrow. You'd make Friday." And she said, "How's the dog going to manage 22 miles?" I said, "They've got a truck. He'll ride." She looked at the window for about 4 seconds, and she said, "I don't think it's safe. Not with him. I'll wait for the road." Then she picked up her cup and went upstairs. I stood in that kitchen for a while, and then I went out and told Curtis she was staying, and he said, "Suit yourself," and they went back down the mountain. And I want to be honest about what I thought, because it wasn't romantic. What I thought was, she just talked herself out of the thing she's been saving 9 years for, and she used a deaf dog to do it. I let it alone for a day. That's not restraint. That's cowardice with better manners. But on the 8th, the 5th day, we were splitting wood on the lee side of the cabin, and she said something about how she'd have to redo the whole appointment system on Reserve Street, and I put the axe down. I said, "Tess, Curtis offered to walk you down and you didn't go. I've explained that. You explained it with a dog who's ridden in a truck his whole life." She got very still. And then she said, in the flattest voice you've ever heard, "Say what you're saying." So I said it, and I'd like to tell you I was gentle about it. I wasn't especially. I said, "I think you've spent 9 years working nights to buy a thing you don't want, and I think you found out somewhere around Butte, and I think a road closure is the first thing that's ever given you permission not to go." She hit me with it straight back. She said, "And what would you know about it?" So I told her about Julie. 11 years ago I was engaged to a woman named Julie Ostrander, and 8 days before the wedding she sat me down in her mother's kitchen and called it off, and she was right to. She said, and I've never forgotten the wording, "Cal, you've never once picked anything. You've just kept agreeing. I had a house in Billings and a job selling commercial flooring, and I did not, at any point in that entire life, remember choosing any of it. So I quit, and I sold the house, and I took a winter caretaker position at 7,000 feet, because a man I knew mentioned it, and I told everybody it was for 1 season, while I figured out what I actually wanted. That was 11 years ago. I said to Tess, standing in the snow with an axe in my hand, "I've been up here 11 winters saying the same 4 words you said to me in that doorway. Just until it clears. Nobody's coming to plow me out. Nobody's coming to plow you out either. That's the whole thing I know about it." She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she said, "It's not that I don't want to be a vet. I know. It's that I don't want to be the one who owns it. I don't want to be the person everybody comes to at 4 in the afternoon with a problem. I've known that since about August." Her voice did something on the last part. "Do you have any idea how much money I've saved for a thing I figured out I didn't want in August?" And I said, $180,000. And she laughed so hard she had to sit down on the woodpile. The road opened on the 10th at about 2 in the afternoon. She left at 3:30. I want to be accurate about that too, because people assume she stayed and she didn't. She went. And she should have. She drove to Missoula and she sat across a desk from a woman who had held a practice open for her for 4 months, and she said no to her face, which took 8 hours of driving and about 9 minutes of talking, and which she says was the hardest thing she's ever done. Dr. Halverson sold to the gull, and Tess drove back to Spokane and worked her scheduled shifts, because she is that kind of person, and I went back to being a man alone on a mountain with a wood stove and a satellite radio. Except I gave my notice on the 14th. I called the management company in Bozeman and told them this was my last winter, and they said they'd need me through May, and I said that was fine, and then I sat in the office and looked at the wall for about an hour. 11 years, 1 phone call, 4 minutes. She came back on the 6th of April. She didn't call ahead, which, given the state of that landline, was probably the correct decision. I was up on the roof of the east wing chipping ice off a valley, and I heard a car on the switchbacks, which in April means somebody who has business up there. She got out. Boone got out slower. She said, "The road's clear." I said, "It is." And she said, "So I'm not saying it this time." We stood there for a bit, and then she said, "I took a job with a mobile clinic. 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. I don't own anything and I'm not in charge of anybody, and I have never in my life been so relieved." Then she said, "What are you doing in May?" And I said, "Leaving." She said, "Where?" And I said, "I have absolutely no idea," and it was the truest sentence I'd said in 11 years. The lodge opened on the 19th of May. I handed the keys to a summer manager named Priya, and I put 2 bags in the back of my truck, which is all 11 years of my life took up, and Tess followed me down the 22 miles in her car, with the dog in the front seat. We stopped in Hollow Fork and had breakfast at a place with 4 tables. I don't know how this ends. I want to say that plainly, because I've noticed that people telling stories like this always seem to know, and I don't. It's been 14 months. We are 2 people who are extremely bad at choosing things, trying to choose things, in each other's general direction. Some weeks that's clumsy. But last November the pass closed early, the 2nd of the month, which is unusual, and she was at my place in Coeur d'Alene, and it came up on the radio. And she looked at me across the kitchen and said, "Just until the road clears?" And I said, "No, let's stay." One last thing. Curtis offered to walk her down on the 4th day. She had 2 days to spare. If she'd gone, she'd own a practice on Reserve Street right now, and she'd have a house and a name on a sign and $180,000 converted into something you can point at. Some people tell me that road closure saved her life. Other people, and I've heard this more than once, tell me that a man with 11 wasted winters behind him talked a woman out of the single biggest thing she ever built, and that he had no business doing it. So settle it for me in the comments, because I'm too close to it. Was I right to say what I said in the snow that day? Or should I have kept my mouth shut and let her sign? And if you sat through all 6 days with me, subscribe. There's a new one every week, and every single one is about somebody who told themselves it was temporary and then looked up 11 years later. Thanks for sitting with me.